Have you ever looked at something that seemed invincible, a fortress of power and might, and wondered if it could truly be shattered? Imagine the greatest naval stronghold in the world, a colossal bastion of defense that defied all known military logic. For the Empire of Japan in 1944, that was Truk Lagoon, the Gibraltar of the Pacific. A sprawling complex of anchorages, airfields, and supply depots deep within their vast Central Pacific defensive perimeter. It was a place where their combined fleet could shelter, refit, and launch devastating attacks against any Allied advance. It was, by all accounts, impregnable. The very thought of assailing it was considered suicidal. Yet, in the pre-dawn darkness of February 17, 1944, a quiet whisper carried across the vast expanse of the Central Pacific, a whisper of a storm so massive, so revolutionary, that it would not merely dent this fortress, but utterly obliterate it, and in doing so, rewrite the rules of naval warfare forever. This isn't just a story about a battle. It's about a paradigm shift, a clash of doctrines, and the relentless march of industrial innovation that birthed a new era of global power projection. This is the story of how America stunned Japan with the flight decks that never slept, the legendary Essex-class aircraft carriers. Our journey begins not with the roar of engines or the blast of guns, but with a silent, almost unbearable moment of revelation. It's the early hours of February 17, 1944, aboard the USS Essex. Tommy McKenna, an aviation ordnance man, is going about his morning watch, the ship a hive of quiet, purposeful activity. But then he notices Seaman Second Class Jerry Nakamura, a young Japanese-American sailor from Hawaii, translating intercepted radio transmissions. Jerry's face is etched with a mixture of terror and profound sadness. He's crying. "They don't know we're coming," Jerry whispers, his voice thick with emotion, as he translates the casual chatter from Japanese air control towers across the Caroline Islands. They're talking about mail delivery schedules and movie nights. They have no idea. Pause for a moment and absorb the sheer, gut-wrenching irony of that scene. On one side, the mundane realities of daily life, the innocent hum of a military outpost in what they believed was an unassailable sanctuary. On the other, bearing down upon them, was the largest concentration of naval striking power in human history. 15 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, over 900 combat aircraft. Task Force 58, under the brilliant leadership of Admiral Raymond Spruance and Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher. What Jerry Nakamura's tears illuminated for Tommy McKenna, and for us today, was the true magnitude of what was unfolding. This wasn't just another raid. It wasn't another bloody island conquest. This was the moment American naval aviation was about to demonstrate a capability so overwhelming, so fundamentally transformative, that it would render obsolete every assumption about naval warfare that had governed the previous 3 centuries. This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about reshaping the very future of military might. The age of the battleship, with its mighty guns and ponderous movements, was over. A new age was dawning, one where power was measured not by the range of heavy artillery, but by the endless, relentless cycling of aircraft from flight decks that simply never slept. To truly grasp the seismic shift that was about to occur, we need to rewind 6 months. At that time, the Central Pacific was firmly under Japan's dominion. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the strategic genius behind Pearl Harbor, had meticulously crafted a defensive perimeter stretching thousands of miles, from the icy Aleutian Islands to the tropical Solomons. Its linchpin, its perceived Achilles' heel, was Truk Lagoon, a fortress deemed so impregnable it earned the moniker Gibraltar of the Pacific. From Truk, Japanese naval and air forces could lash out at any Allied advance, safeguarding the vital sea lanes connecting resource-rich southern territories to the Japanese home islands. The Japanese strategy was elegant in its brutal simplicity. An outer ring of fortified atolls, the Gilberts, Marshalls, Carolines, would serve as unsinkable aircraft carriers. Their coral runways and hidden gun positions would make any American advance prohibitively costly. Japanese planners were convinced that even if the Americans could muster the naval strength to assault these positions, the casualties would be so severe that American public opinion, notoriously sensitive to high losses, would force a negotiated peace. They had seen the horrifying cost at Tarawa, where 1,090 Marines died and 2,101 were wounded in just 3 days, fighting to capture a tiny coral atoll no larger than the National Mall in Washington, D.C. If that was the price for one tiny speck of land, what would be the cost of advancing through hundreds of similar fortifications, all the way to Japan itself? Their calculation, while chillingly logical, contained a catastrophic misjudgment. They had failed to comprehend the true implications of America's industrial capacity, and they had not anticipated the revolutionary changes in naval aviation that were already taking shape in the shipyards of Newport News, Brooklyn, and Norfolk. The Essex-class aircraft carriers, which began entering service in late 1943, represented more than just larger flight decks and more aircraft. They embodied a fundamental transformation in the nature of naval power itself. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, the air group commander aboard the USS Essex, and later the Navy's leading ace, understood this transformation perhaps better than anyone. Standing on the flight deck in the pre-dawn hours of February 17th, watching the final preparations for the strike against Truk, he could feel the rhythmic vibration of the ship's machinery beneath his feet. 4 massive steam turbines generated 120,000 horsepower, propelling the Essex and her sisters at speeds exceeding 30 knots, faster than many battleships. But speed, as McCampbell knew, was only a fraction of the equation. What made the Essex-class truly revolutionary was its ability to sustain high-tempo flight operations around the clock. The Japanese think of aircraft carriers the way they think of battleships, McCampbell had explained to his squadron commanders during the final briefing. They see them as platforms for delivering a single decisive blow. But that's not what we are. We're factories. We manufacture destruction on an industrial scale, and we never stop. This factory analogy is crucial. Picture a massive floating assembly line. Each Essex-class carrier could launch and recover aircraft continuously. The ship's 2 enormous elevators could hoist aircraft from the hangar deck to the flight deck in a mere 90 seconds. The 2 powerful steam catapults could launch a fully loaded Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighter or a Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber every 30 seconds. Think about that. A fully armed aircraft, roaring off the deck every half-minute, hour after hour, day after day. This was not just a ship. It was a self-replenishing, self-sustaining weapon system of unparalleled efficiency. But even more critically, the Essex-class had been designed to operate not as individual ships, but as part of integrated, fast carrier task groups. Imagine 3 or 4 of these giants, protected by a screen of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, operating in circular formations. This concept, perfected by Admiral Mark Mitcher during the Marshall Islands campaign just a month earlier, demonstrated that American carriers could maintain continuous air operations for weeks at a time, launching strike after strike, while simultaneously providing air defense for the fleet and close air support for amphibious operations. The Japanese had never seen anything like it, because nothing like it had ever existed. This was naval warfare elevated to an industrial art form, a symphony of logistics, engineering, and human coordination on an unprecedented scale. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, and now commander of the Central Pacific Area Fleet from his headquarters on Saipan, had watched the destruction in the Marshall Islands with growing alarm. The speed of the American advance was unprecedented. Kwajalein Atoll, which the Japanese had fortified for 2 years and defended with 8,500 troops, had fallen in just 4 days. The American 4th Marine Division and 7th Infantry Division had learned bitter lessons from Tarawa, refining their amphibious tactics. But what truly shocked Nagumo was the relentless, overwhelming role of American naval aviation. The Essex-class carriers had maintained continuous air cover throughout the Marshall Islands operation, launching more than 2,000 sorties in support of the landings. American F-6F Hellcats had swept Japanese aircraft from the skies with terrifying efficiency, while SBD Dauntless dive bombers and TBF Avenger torpedo bombers had systematically obliterated every Japanese installation. But the most disturbing aspect of the American performance, the one that haunted Nagumo and his staff, was the sheer sustainability of their operations. Japanese carrier doctrine called for massing all available aircraft for a single decisive strike, a potent, but ultimately finite, punch. The Americans, however, demonstrated the ability to launch continuous attacks for days on end. Commander Ryunosuke Kusaka, Nagumo's chief of staff, conveyed the chilling reality in a classified assessment to Combined Fleet Headquarters. They operate their carriers like we operate our airfields, but their airfields can move at 30 knots, and they are defended by battleships. We have no answer for this. Kusaka's report proved prophetic. As Task Force 58 closed in on Truk Lagoon, Japan's most powerful fortress was about to become its deadliest trap. The morning of February 17th, 1944, dawned with an unnerving silence for the Japanese garrison at Truk. Then, at 0530, radar operators at Truk's Param airfield detected something impossible: a large formation of aircraft approaching from the east. Lieutenant Jiro Tanaka, the duty officer, dismissed it as a navigation error. American carriers were 700 miles away in the Marshalls. No carrier-based aircraft had the range to strike Truk from that distance and return. But at 0615, as the sun began to paint the Caroline Islands, 72 Grumman F-6F Hellcats from Task Force 58 roared over Truk's northern airfields at treetop level. This was the largest carrier strike force ever assembled, and it had approached Truk undetected. The American carriers had maintained strict radio silence, and their patrol lines extended far beyond the reach of Japanese reconnaissance. The Japanese response was immediate, but chaotic. Around 80 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters scrambled, but they faced critical disadvantages. The Hellcats held a decisive edge in altitude and speed, diving onto the rising Zeros. More crucially, Japanese pilots were largely inexperienced replacements, hurriedly trained to fill the gaps left by the veteran aviators lost in prolonged fighting elsewhere. As one American pilot, Ensign Roy Rushing, described it, "The air battle over Truk was the most one-sided fight I ever saw." The Hellcat, with its powerful 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, could outclimb, outdive, and outfight the lighter Zero. Its heavy armor and self-sealing fuel tanks allowed it to absorb damage that would instantly destroy a Japanese fighter. Within 2 hours, 50 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in aerial combat, with the Americans losing only 4 Hellcats. The air battle was a massacre, a terrifying demonstration of tactical surprise combined with technological and training superiority. But this was merely the opening act. Even as the fighter sweep cleared Truk's skies, a second, even larger wave of American planes approached. SBD Dauntless dive bombers, TBF Avenger torpedo bombers, and F-4U Corsair fighter bombers from the 9 carriers of Task Force 58. Their targets, the ships anchored in Truk Lagoon. What they found exceeded even the most optimistic American intelligence estimates. The lagoon was packed with the remnants of the Japanese combined fleet: battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and over 30 auxiliary vessels, including tankers, transports, and vital repair ships. Though Admiral Minechi Koga, Yamamoto's successor, had wisely ordered most heavy units to withdraw earlier, the logistical backbone of Japan's Central Pacific operations remained. Lieutenant Frank Lawler, piloting an SBD Dauntless from the USS Enterprise, selected the largest target he could find, the submarine tender Rio de Janeiro Maru, a converted passenger liner serving as a floating repair facility. His 1,000-pound bomb struck amidships, exploding in the engine room. The Rio de Janeiro Maru settled by the stern and sank within minutes, taking with her irreplaceable spare parts and technical equipment vital for Japanese submarine operations. Similar scenes of methodical destruction played out across the lagoon. The light cruiser Katori, attempting to escape, was caught by torpedo bombers and sunk with all hands. By noon on February 17th, over 20 Japanese vessels lay on the bottom or were burning wrecks. But the true measure of American naval aviation's transformation wasn't the devastation of the first day. It was the fact that it continued without interruption for a second day, and then a third. The Essex-class carriers maintained continuous flight operations throughout Operation Hailstone, launching strike after strike while simultaneously recovering damaged aircraft, rearming, and refueling those that returned. This was the deck cycle that never slept, a feat of coordination and endurance that Japanese naval aviation simply could not match. Aviation Chief Petty Officer Hiroshi Suzuki, serving aboard the light carrier Chitose near Truk, observed the American attacks with a unique, chilling perspective. Suzuki was a veteran, having flown in the Pearl Harbor attack and early victories in the Dutch East Indies. He understood carrier operations intimately. What he witnessed at Truk convinced him that Japan had lost the war. "Our doctrine calls for massing all available aircraft for a single attack," Suzuki wrote in his diary on the evening of February 17th. "We launch everything at once, achieve surprise, deliver maximum damage, and withdraw." But the Americans do not withdraw. They stay and they attack again and again and again. Their carriers operate like air bases, but air bases that can move and are protected by the most powerful fleet ever assembled. Suzuki's observations were confirmed by the tactical analysis conducted by surviving Japanese staff officers. The American carriers maintained continuous air operations for 48 hours, launching over 1,200 combat sorties. The logistical implications were staggering. Each Essex-class carrier embarked roughly 90 aircraft, requiring hundreds of tons of aviation gasoline, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and hundreds of bombs and torpedoes. The ability to sustain such intensive operations while remaining at sea represented a revolution in naval logistics that Japan simply could not replicate. The secret wasn't just in the carrier's size, but in their design philosophy. Unlike Japanese carriers, which prioritized aircraft capacity over survivability, the Essex-class was built to operate under combat conditions for extended periods. Ammunition handling systems could move bombs and torpedoes from magazines to the flight deck in minutes. Aviation gasoline systems could refuel an entire air group without interrupting flight operations. And crucially, their damage control systems and armor protection allowed them to absorb battle damage and keep fighting. This survivability was demonstrated repeatedly. The USS Franklin, for instance, survived 2 major kamikaze attacks, including one that penetrated the flight deck and exploded in the hangar bay, killing over 700 men. Yet, she limped home, was repaired, and returned to service. Not a single Essex-class carrier was sunk during the war, despite sustained attacks by Japanese aircraft submarines, and suicide bombers. This resilience allowed American task force commanders to accept risks that would have been suicidal for more fragile vessels, pushing deep within the Japanese defensive perimeter to strike previously unreachable targets. The destruction of Truk Lagoon had devastating clarity, but its strategic impact extended far beyond the immediate losses. On February 18th, American carrier aircraft destroyed another 27 Japanese vessels, bringing the total to 12 warships, 32 merchant vessels, and 275 aircraft. Over 140,000 tons of Japanese shipping, along with critical fuel, ammunition, and supplies, lay at the bottom of the lagoon. The Japanese combined fleet, deprived of its forward operating base, was forced to withdraw to bases in the Western Pacific. This geographic displacement proved decisive, leaving Japanese ground defenders in the Mariana Islands and beyond without effective naval support. The American success at Truk also validated the core strategic concept underlying the Central Pacific campaign: island hopping. Instead of costly frontal assaults on every fortified island, Admiral Chester Nimitz's forces could use their superior mobility and striking power to neutralize key enemy positions, then bypass them entirely. This strategy dramatically reduced American casualties while accelerating the pace of advance toward Japan. The foundation for this strategy had been laid 3 months earlier in the Gilbert Islands, where American forces first demonstrated the integration of carrier aviation, amphibious assault, and advanced base construction. The assault on Tarawa in November 1943 had been a brutal, costly education. The 2nd Marine Division suffered over 3,000 casualties in capturing Betio Island, a coral atoll barely 300 acres in size. But the lessons learned at Tarawa transformed American amphibious doctrine and made possible the rapid advances that followed. Chief among these lessons was the critical importance of advanced base construction. Within hours of securing Betio Island, Navy Construction Battalion, or the Seabees, began transforming the captured Japanese airfield into an American airbase, working under constant threat of air attack. Hampered by coral and debris, the Seabees had the airfield operational within 15 hours of the end of organized resistance. This seemingly impossible achievement, repeated throughout the Central Pacific campaign, proved as vital as any victory won by Marine infantry or Navy pilots. Consider the story of Construction Battalion Chief William Big Bill Morrison. Before the war, Morrison was a civilian contractor in Hawaii, building runways and hangars. On December 7, 1941, he watched from his rooftop as Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers devastated the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. He saw battleships capsize, realizing the age of the battleship was ending. But it took 2 years of war for him to understand what would replace it. The answer became clear during the assault on Kwajalein Atoll in February 1944. Morrison's battalion, the 121st Naval Construction Battalion, landed with the 4th Marine Division on Roy Island. The pre-invasion bombardment had been more effective than anything previously attempted, with Task Force 58's carriers and the fast battleships delivering concentrated fire for 3 days. When the first wave of amphibious tractors crossed the lagoon reef, they found Japanese defenses largely destroyed and the defenders demoralized. "We went from ship to shore to operational airfield in 60 hours, Morrison later reported. That included removing debris, grading and surfacing a 4,300-foot runway, installing fuel systems, and constructing facilities for a full fighter squadron. The Japanese had spent 2 years building Roy into a fortress. We turned it into an American air base in less than 3 days. This incredible speed of base construction had strategic implications far beyond tactical advantages. Each captured atoll became a stepping stone for the next advance, and more importantly, a node in an expanding network of American air power. B-24 Liberator heavy bombers based at Tarawa could strike targets in the Marshalls. B-25 Mitchell medium bombers based at Kwajalein could support operations in the Carolines. The American advance was creating its own infrastructure of support, while simultaneously dismantling Japan's. It was a self-perpetuating cycle of expansion and destruction. Japan's response to this American transformation was crippled by fundamental limitations in its industrial capacity and strategic doctrine. While Japan began the war with a technological edge, exemplified by the superior Zero fighter and the skill of its naval aviators, its industrial base simply could not replace losses at the rate they were being inflicted. Furthermore, the Japanese training system could not produce new pilots quickly enough to maintain quality as quantity demands skyrocketed. Commander Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned the Pearl Harbor attack and now served as a staff officer with the combined fleet, recognized the magnitude of the crisis. In a confidential report submitted to Admiral Koga in March 1944, Genda starkly outlined the disparities developing between American and Japanese carrier operations. The enemy has achieved industrial and operational capabilities that we cannot match, Genda wrote. Their Essex-class carriers are larger, faster, and more survivable than our ships. Their pilots receive more training and fly more advanced aircraft. Most critically, their logistical systems allow them to sustain high-tempo operations indefinitely, while our forces are limited by fuel and ammunition constraints that grow more severe with each passing month. Genda's analysis was painfully accurate. Japanese aircraft carriers, designed for speed and aircraft capacity, lacked the armor protection and robust damage control systems that allowed American carriers to operate effectively in contested waters. Japanese pilots, while individually skillful, received significantly less training time than their American counterparts due to crippling fuel shortages and the relentless pressure to quickly replace combat losses. Most importantly, the Japanese logistics system was crumbling under the relentless pressure of American submarine attacks and the increasing distances over which supplies had to be transported. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, executed with ruthless efficiency. The submarine war in the Central Pacific was being fought in parallel with the surface actions, and it was proving equally decisive. American submarines, operating from advanced bases in the Marshall Islands and supported by invaluable intelligence from the Ultra Code-Breaking program, were systematically destroying the merchant shipping that connected Japan's far-flung empire. The statistics were devastating. In 1943, American submarines sank 335 Japanese merchant vessels. In 1944, this number soared to 603 ships, representing over 3 million tons of shipping. This was not just a naval engagement, it was an economic strangulation. The USS Seahorse, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Slate Cutter, exemplified this aggressive submarine warfare. Operating from Pearl Harbor and later from the newly captured base at Majuro Atoll, the Seahorse conducted 6 war patrols between January 1943 and September 1944, sinking 20 Japanese vessels totaling over 72,000 tons. But Cutter's most significant achievement wasn't just the tonnage. It was the strategic impact of his operations in the approaches to Truk Lagoon. During the Seahorse's 4th patrol in March 1944, she intercepted a Japanese convoy carrying aviation gasoline and aircraft parts to the besieged garrison at Truk. The convoy consisted of 3 precious cargo ships and 2 escort destroyers, representing a substantial portion of the logistical support available to Japanese forces in the Caroline Islands. Cutter's attack, conducted on the night of March 15th, sank all 3 cargo ships and damaged one of the escorts. The loss of this convoy forced Japanese commanders at Truk to further reduce air operations, desperately conserving what little fuel and ammunition remained for what they assumed would be an eventual American invasion. But the invasion never came. American strategic planners, following their doctrine of bypassing heavily defended positions, had decided that Truk could be neutralized without the need for a costly amphibious assault. The massive carrier raids of February and April 1944 had decimated Japanese air power in the Caroline Islands, while submarine attacks had severed the supply lines that might have allowed a recovery. By mid-1944, Truk had been transformed from Japan's most formidable forward base into a strategic liability, its 40,000-man garrison isolated and ineffective, a fortress starved from within. This transformation reflected the broader changes in Pacific naval warfare made possible by the Essex-class carriers. Traditional naval strategy, based on controlling key geographic positions with fixed bases, was being superseded by a new form of warfare based on mobility, sustainability, and the overwhelming projection of air power. The Americans had not simply built better ships, they had created an entirely new way of fighting at sea. The technical innovations that enabled this transformation extended throughout American naval aviation. The seamless integration of radar and radio communication allowed American task force commanders to coordinate the operations of hundreds of aircraft across thousands of square miles of ocean. A truly astonishing feat of real-time command and control. The development of underway replenishment techniques meant American carriers could remain at sea for weeks at a time, refueling and rearming from fleet oilers and ammunition ships without ever having to return to port. This eliminated vulnerable transit times and maximized operational presence. The establishment of advanced bases throughout the Central Pacific provided crucial staging areas for long-range operations and safe havens for damaged ships and aircraft. But perhaps the most crucial innovation was organizational. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, implemented an alternating command structure for the Pacific Fleet. When Admiral Raymond Spruance commanded the Fifth Fleet, his carriers were designated Task Force 58 under Admiral Mark Mitcher. When Admiral William Bull Halsey commanded the Third Fleet, the same carriers became Task Force 38 under Admiral John McCain. And this brilliant rotation allowed one command team to conduct active operations while the other planned the next offensive, creating an operational tempo that the Japanese could not possibly match. There was no downtime, no respite. The pressure was unyielding. The Japanese were acutely aware of their disadvantage, but lacked the industrial capacity to remedy it. Captain Atsushi Oi, a staff officer with the combined fleet who had observed American operations from the beginning, submitted a detailed analysis to the Naval General Staff in April 1944, starkly outlining the hopelessness of Japan's position in the Central Pacific. The enemy has demonstrated the ability to project air power on a scale that renders our fixed defenses obsolete, Oi wrote. Their carrier task forces can deliver more aircraft to any target in the Central Pacific than we can base permanently at that location. Worse, their mobile bases can be reinforced and supplied indefinitely, while our fixed installations become isolated and untenable once the enemy achieves local air superiority. Oi recommended a fundamental change in Japanese strategy. Withdraw the combined fleet to waters near Japan, where it could be supported by land-based aircraft, and concentrate defensive efforts on the Mariana Islands, which were close enough to Japan to receive meaningful support. This recommendation was partially adopted, but it came far too late to alter the outcome. The assault on the Mariana Islands in June 1944 would demonstrate the full maturation of American amphibious and carrier warfare doctrine. Task Force 58, now expanded to a staggering 15 fleet carriers and 4 light carriers, would support the simultaneous invasion of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian, while simultaneously annihilating the Japanese Mobile fleet in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as American pilots famously dubbed the aerial battles of June 19th to 20th, 1944, would destroy the last effective remnant of Japanese carrier aviation. The sky itself seemed to rain zeros, as over 300 Japanese aircraft were shot down at a cost of fewer than 30 American planes. It was less a battle and more a target practice, a crushing testament to the systemic superiority America had achieved. But the foundations for that victory were laid in the seemingly routine operations of the Essex-class carriers during the long months of 1943 and 1944. It was in the relentless cycle of launch and recovery, day and night, in all weather, under all conditions, that American flight decks maintained their decisive advantage. This capability, the ability to sustain high-tempo operations indefinitely, was the ultimate game-changer. Seaman First Class Robert Chun, a Chinese-American sailor who served as an aircraft handler aboard the USS Yorktown, understood this better than most. Chun had joined the Navy after Pearl Harbor, driven by a desire to fight the Japanese forces devastating his ancestral homeland. During the Marshall Islands campaign, he worked 18-hour shifts on the Yorktown's flight deck, a dangerous ballet of jets, props, and steam, guiding aircraft into position for round-the-clock operations. The Japanese pilots were brave, Chun would later recall, maybe braver than us. But bravery wasn't enough. They would attack us once, sometimes twice if they were lucky, and then they were finished. They had to return to their bases, refuel, rearm, maybe wait for replacement aircraft or pilots. But we never stopped. When they flew back to their bases, we followed them. When they tried to hide their ships in remote anchorages, we found them. When they thought they were safe, we appeared over the horizon with another strike. This relentless pressure had a cumulative effect that went far beyond immediate destruction. The knowledge that American carriers could appear anywhere, at any time, forced Japanese commanders to disperse their forces and maintain constant vigilance, reducing the effectiveness of their defenses and preventing the concentration of forces that might have slowed the American advance. The psychological impact was equally devastating. Japanese naval aviators, who had dominated the skies for the first year of the war, found themselves increasingly outmatched, flying inferior aircraft from ships that seemed immune to retaliation. The confidence that had sustained Japanese forces through their early victories was gradually eroded by a series of defeats that demonstrated American superiority in every aspect of naval aviation. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most successful fighter pilots, with over 60 victories, experienced this transformation firsthand. His encounter with American F-6F Hellcats over Kwajalein in February 1944 shattered his earlier confidence. The Americans had learned how to fight, Sakai wrote in his memoir. Their aircraft were better than ours. Their pilots were better trained, and there were many more of them. But what truly frightened me was their organization. Japanese fighters would attack individually, each pilot seeking personal glory. American fighters attacked as a team, with coordinated tactics and mutual support. They fought like a machine, and we could not defeat a machine with individual courage. Sakai's observation captured a fundamental aspect of the American transformation. The technical superiority of American aircraft and the industrial capacity that produced them in vast numbers were important, but equally critical was the development of tactical doctrine that maximized the effectiveness of these advantages. American carrier air groups trained extensively in coordinated attack techniques, using radio communication and standardized procedures to deliver concentrated firepower against selected targets. This tactical evolution was exemplified by Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell. McCampbell, who would become the Navy's leading ace, developed a training program that emphasized teamwork over individual skill. His pilots practiced coordinated attacks against simulated targets, learning to divide responsibilities and provide mutual support during combat. The results were demonstrated repeatedly. "We don't train heroes," McCampbell explained to a war correspondent. "We train professionals. A hero might shoot down 2 or 3 enemy aircraft before he gets killed. A professional will shoot down 1 enemy aircraft and come back to do it again tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that." This professional approach was reflected in every aspect of American carrier operations. Maintenance procedures were standardized. Logistical systems were designed for sustainability. Most importantly, American commanders planned operations with the expectation that they would continue for weeks or months, not just hours or days. The contrast with Japanese doctrine was stark. Japanese naval aviation was built around the decisive battle concept, a single, overwhelming attack to determine the campaign's outcome. This worked when they had superiority, but as American capabilities soared and Japanese resources dwindled, the limitations of this approach became glaringly apparent. The cumulative effect of these American advantages became brutally clear during the final phase of the Central Pacific Campaign, when Task Force 58 turned its attention to the Japanese home islands themselves. The capture of bases in the Mariana Islands brought American B-29 Superfortress bombers within range of Japan, but it also allowed the Essex-class carriers to operate in waters that had been considered the inner sanctum of Japanese defense. The raids on Tokyo and other Japanese cities in February and March 1945 demonstrated the complete transformation of naval warfare. American aircraft carriers, operating within 200 miles of the Japanese coast, launched strikes against aircraft factories, naval bases, and transportation infrastructure. The attacks continued for days, with carriers maintaining their operational tempo despite desperate attempts by Japanese land-based aircraft and kamikaze units to drive them away. Aviation radioman Second-class Peter Kowalski, serving aboard the USS Hancock, observed this final evolution. By early 1945, he had witnessed American naval aviation transform from a force barely capable of defending itself into the most powerful instrument of warfare in human history. "The Japanese kept attacking us with everything they had," Kowalski recounted. "Kamikaze planes, conventional bombers, even some of their remaining fighters. But it didn't matter. We had so many ships and so many aircraft that we could absorb their attacks and keep fighting. They would hit us once or twice and think they had accomplished something. But 20 minutes later, we would have replacement aircraft in the air and revenge strikes heading for their bases." This sustainability under attack was perhaps the most important characteristic of the Essex-class carriers. Their damage control capabilities, combined with the redundancy built into American task force organization, meant operations could continue even under the most severe attacks. When the USS Franklin was nearly destroyed by a Japanese bombing attack in March 1945, killing over 700 of her crew, the survivors saved the vessel. More importantly, the loss of one carrier did not significantly degrade the capabilities of Task Force 58, which continued operations with its remaining 14 fleet carriers. Japan had no equivalent capability. Each Japanese loss represented a permanent degradation of their naval power, while American losses were quickly made good by the continuous output of their shipyards and training programs. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the air attack on Pearl Harbor and now served as an operations officer with the combined fleet, witnessed the American operations off Okinawa from Tokyo. In his final report on American carrier capabilities, submitted just weeks before Japan's surrender, Fuchida acknowledged the complete transformation. "The enemy has created a form of sea power that we cannot counter with our remaining forces," Fuchida wrote. "Their carriers operate continuously, their aircraft attack relentlessly, and their fleet can absorb damage that would destroy any similar Japanese formation. We began this war believing that spirit and skill could overcome material disadvantage. We have learned that industrial capacity and organizational efficiency are more decisive than courage or tactical brilliance. Fuchida's assessment was confirmed by the final statistics. American submarines had sunk thousands of Japanese vessels. American carrier aircraft had destroyed thousands more and supported amphibious operations that captured every major Japanese position. The Essex-class carriers steamed over 300,000 miles in combat, launched over 100,000 combat sorties, and not a single one was lost to enemy action. The ultimate lesson of the Central Pacific Campaign was not purely technological, but profoundly organizational. America succeeded not simply because it built better ships or trained better pilots, but because it created a system of warfare that could adapt, learn, and improve continuously under the relentless pressure of combat. The Essex-class carriers were impressive individual vessels, but their true power came from their integration into a larger system that included submarines, amphibious forces, advanced bases, and the industrial capacity to sustain them all indefinitely. The Japanese, despite their individual courage and tactical skill, never developed an equivalent system. Their strategy remained focused on the decisive battle, the single overwhelming blow. When American forces demonstrated the ability to absorb such blows and continue fighting, Japanese strategy had no answer. This failure wasn't just a matter of resources, it reflected a fundamental difference in strategic thinking. American planners, influenced by their understanding of industrial warfare, designed for sustained operations. Japanese planners, influenced by earlier successes against technologically inferior opponents, optimized for short, decisive campaigns. The Central Pacific Campaign proved which approach was better suited to the realities of modern warfare. The Essex-class carriers and the operational doctrine built around them created a form of naval power that was both overwhelming in its immediate impact and sustainable over time. This combination of capability and endurance proved decisive, not only in the Pacific War but in the broader strategic competition that followed. The legacy of these flight decks that never slept extends far beyond the immediate military consequences. They showed the world that air power could be projected globally from mobile platforms, influencing post-war international order and shaping military operations from Korea to the Persian Gulf. The integration of technology, logistics, and human organization that characterized American success became a model for military innovation throughout the modern era. As the USS Essex steamed into Tokyo Bay in September 1945 for the surrender ceremonies, the capabilities demonstrated during the Central Pacific Campaign echoed into the future. They had built something new, a way of fighting that no one had ever seen before. The Japanese learned too late that the ocean had become an American lake, and that the carriers were the keys to that kingdom. This lesson is a profound one, extending beyond the battlefields of history. It's a blueprint for overcoming any complex challenge. The power of relentless, coordinated effort, adaptability, and an unwavering commitment to a resilient system. It's about understanding that individual brilliance can only take you so far. True, sustainable victory comes from integrating every component, refining every process, and maintaining the capacity to learn and endure. The flight decks that never slept didn't just win a war. They defined the future of naval power, and in doing so, offered timeless insights into the very nature of success itself. They taught us that true strength isn't just about the biggest punch, but about the unyielding capacity to keep fighting, adapting, and innovating, day after day, year after year, until the job is done.